For the last few decades, we've all been living in this hyper-connected world, one that was built for pure speed and efficiency. But, a series of global shocks has kind of thrown a wrench in the works, and now everything is changing. So let's dive in and take a closer look at how this incredibly intricate system is being completely rewired. To really get a handle on this massive global shift, we don't need to look any further than the device you're probably holding in your hand right now. It feels like this simple, single object, right? But its creation, wow, that's one of the most complex stories on the entire planet. And this just shows you a piece of that story. I mean, think about it. The screen, that might come from South Korea. The super advanced chip that powers it all, Taiwan. The software, that's from the US. And then it's all put together in China, using rare earth minerals that have been sourced from all over the world. It's this incredible miracle of global cooperation, this vast, intricate web we call the global value chain. And for decades, this system worked beautifully. It was a well-oiled machine. But what we've seen recently is just how fragile it all is. So what happens when just one link in that incredibly complex chain snaps? Well, as it turns out, the whole system can start to unravel. And that brings us to the first part of our story today, what we're calling the Great Unraveling. We're going to look at this series of shocks that really put this global system to the test and, honestly, revealed its deepest vulnerabilities. So this is the key concept right here, global value chains, or GVCs. For the longest time, there was really only one rule. Make things as cheaply and as quickly as you possibly can, and it didn't matter where all the different parts came from. This created this amazingly efficient, just-in-time world, but it was a world with almost no slack, no safety net. And then came the disruptions. It was like a 1-2-3 punch. First, you had rising trade tensions between the US and China, which brought politics and competition into the mix. Then, boom, the COVID-19 pandemic shuts down entire countries, grinding production to a halt. And more recently, the war in Ukraine created these massive shocks to energy and food supplies. Each one of these events was a major blow on its own, but together, they exposed just how fragile the whole system really was. And look, this isn't just some abstract economic theory we're talking about. This stuff has real human consequences. And to see just how real, we need to look at a place where the system didn't just bend, it actually broke.
So let's zoom in on Brazil. The country became this critical case study for what happens when a crisis completely overwhelms public institutions, and who or what steps in to fill that void.
Now, to really understand what happened in Brazil, we need to talk about this idea of institutional voids. Basically, these are gaps that show up when a government just can't provide essential services. You can have the long-term sort of chronic voids, think inadequate roads or schools, but a crisis can create sudden, acute voids, like when a healthcare system completely collapses under the weight of a pandemic. And this number really shows you the scale of the challenge in Brazil. A staggering 40% of the entire workforce depends on what's called the informal economy. We're talking about street vendors, domestic workers, little cash-only businesses. These are the people who are the absolute most vulnerable when an economic shock hits. And that vulnerability created this tragic catch-22. Social isolation, telling people to stay home, was absolutely essential to keep the hospitals from being overrun. But that very same policy paralyzed the informal economy overnight, and it threatened millions of people with hunger. So the solution to the health crisis ended up creating a devastating economic one.
So this is where something truly remarkable happened. With the government completely overwhelmed, corporations, both local Brazilian companies and big multinationals, they stepped into that void. And they didn't just write checks. They took on roles that are normally reserved for the government, and their actions fell into these 6 main categories you see here.
And we're not talking about small gestures. I mean, think about this. The aeronautics company Embraer and the car maker Mercedes-Benz completely adapted their factories to start making ventilators. Nestle provided over $10 million in direct food aid. And you had this coalition of beverage giants that created a movement to help over 300,000 little family-owned shops get back on their feet. They became, for all intents and purposes, a corporate lifeline.
But what happened in Brazil wasn't just some isolated event. It was actually a preview of a permanent, worldwide shift in how we think about trade, about manufacturing, about global relationships. The old rules are literally being rewritten as we speak.
Yeah, the key takeaway here is that companies and countries everywhere were watching what happened. They saw just how quickly that hyper-efficient system could fail, and they realized they needed a whole new playbook, one that valued stability and security above all else. And this brings us to the new vocabulary of our time with words like friendshoring. The idea is pretty simple. You should build your supply chains through countries that you can trust, countries that are your political allies, even if it costs a little bit more. The focus isn't just on the bottom line anymore, it's on reliability. This slide just captures that mindset shift perfectly. We are moving from a world that was guided only by efficiency and cost to one that's now guided by resilience and trust. We're shifting from that just-in-time model, where parts arrive exactly when you need them, to a just-in-case model, where we build in backups and safety nets to protect against the next inevitable shock. Okay, so we've talked about these huge global trends, this great unraveling and rebuilding. But what does it all actually mean for our daily lives? Let's break down why all of this really matters to you and me. Well, first, the products we buy. A world built for resilience instead of pure rock-bottom cost might mean some things get more expensive or are harder to find. Second, jobs. As companies start friendshoring, manufacturing and tech jobs could move out of some countries and into others. And finally, our expectations for corporations are changing. I mean, the Brazil experience showed us what's possible, and we may now expect companies to be a part of the social safety net during a crisis.
And this quote from our source material really says it all. The pandemic was a massive stress test for what we call corporate social responsibility. It basically moved the idea from a public relations slogan to a practical necessity. The very purpose of a corporation in our society is now up for debate in a way it really hasn't been for generations. Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. This whole global rewiring thing is being driven by a need for security, for dependable partners. But is the end result going to be a world of stronger fences, where we only trade inside these walled-off economic blocks? Or, as that case study in Brazil suggests, could it actually lead to better safety nets, where a new sense of shared responsibility builds a more resilient and maybe even a more equitable world for everyone? Honestly, the answer to that is still being written.